So I figured I'd do a quick take on how I work with buttons in Affinity Designer, and it's more or less an approach that makes them scalable and reusable in the end that I can just use in my web designs or UI designs that allow me to just very quickly scale up something in a design as opposed to just completely creating a button from scratch each time. So you want to create it once and maybe reuse it again later. So we'll make use of some awesome features of Affinity Designer to do such a thing. So what I want to do first is create an actual button, a base button to begin with, and I want the pixel base to be about 60 pixels high and maybe like 200 in width, just as a starting place. And maybe if we're designing maybe a design library or some sort of component library, this is a good use case to just create multiple buttons of different varieties, typically of different colors and sizes. So I'll just use a base font for now, maybe Open Sans or something like that. So we'll just call it button, just to give the text some context here, and probably want about 16 points for that. And I'll cue in Open Sans, maybe make it semi-bold or bold. Semi-bold looks okay to me. And I like maybe just a bit of rounded corners. So I'll go with absolute sizes, create it rounded, and just give it like 3 points. So this would be a basic starter button, I would call it. My blacks, I don't like to go full black, so maybe a 4-4 all the way across. And we can add possibly a stroke. I think I'll leave it out though. So I'm gonna align these central and vertical right there. Okay, so that's going to be like a utility base button. So utility. Next we'll maybe have our primary. I'll just maybe call it that on the text. And maybe let's see what kind of color I want for primary. Maybe just a nice blue, maybe a nice purple or something like that. There we go. And then we have our, I'll just rename this over in the layers. Our text needs to be white for this to really stand out. And maybe it can have a slight gradient. So you can just grab the gradient tool and select that rounded rectangle tool or layer and just add that gradient in where you see fit. I think if you just drag from a certain point of view, it should do its trick. Kind of like that. Okay, and maybe a secondary button, and we'll adjust the colors here to be a bit different. Maybe a green button or something like that might work. And the gradient I used on the primary ones backwards compared to this one, so I want to actually reverse this. And this dark is a little too dark for me. There we go. So there's a set of buttons. You'd use these at your leisure, basically, and it's one size to start with. Say you wanted to create more and more, you could. Maybe some smaller buttons. I'll just kind of key these in, like subtract 40 or add 40 there, and then make this about like 160 or so. Not even that. 20, yeah. So these would be like small buttons, and you could even cue the text to be like 1 point less. Center that. So that dimension was 120 and by 40. So 120, 40. And we'll center this. And this one's gonna probably need to be, it's okay. I was going to say it might need to be a little bit wider since the word is wider. And we'll just align those. I'll go butt up to it and then shift nudge. So I'm holding, my keys aren't telling you this, but if you butt it up against the other shape, hold shift and just nudge with your arrow, it should incrementally go in a strict fashion. I have it set to 8 pixels currently. Okay, great. So say we're settled, we like these. We want to get these to where we could just easily reuse them. But first, before I do that, I want to be sure when I scale these left and right that they don't stretch like that. So for each of these, I'm going to open the constraints panel, and the text inside the shape, assuming it's grouped, is what we don't want to scale. So what you need to do in terms of getting this to work right is make a group of the button. So it'll be probably the text and maybe an icon at some point, plus the button shape itself. When you do that, you need to fixate the primary text, or the actual text in the button, to be non-scalable. So to do that in the constraints panel, you just uncheck these arrows, and you can also align it to any certain side if you need to. In our case, it's going to be central, so we don't have to worry about that. But for each of these, just go through each and uncheck those lines. There we go. And you may have noticed that the constraints, it's kind of a bug that I see, but you need to actually, on the group itself, set a border radius too. So we have 3 on everything. And that's simply because when you add a constraint, it kind of clips that group. And so as you can see here, it's not radius on the outside. Instead, it's just kind of a square with some real light areas showing the constraints path. So that's kind of a quirk, but a way around it is just to set a border radius on the group. So hopefully you won't have to do this a bunch, because the idea is to make these symbols or put them in your assets panel and just reuse, rinse and reuse. So this one is constraints. Yep. And we have right 3 pixels there. Same with this one. Corner, 3 pixels. And last one. Okay, great. So why do all of that? It's mainly so you could do this. So if you want to increase the button, say on a mobile device, and increase it to be a full block width, you can, and the text doesn't skew, so that's great. Same with these, and it stays central, which is awesome. So wherever you fixate it is where it'll stay, and that's just kind of how a constraints group works. So one step more I like to do is add in some symbols or assets. Assets are kind of where I fall probably. Symbols in Affinity Designer, they work well, but I don't update something all that often, to where I would need a symbol to, draft that update elsewhere, unless it's like a header or footer of a website. Assets, in another essence, are just a nice place to organize your components. So say you just have a group of components, in this case will be buttons. You can put these in here for reuse later. You simply create the item, get it all set up the way you like, drag it in, and it'll have the button and its name, layer name in there. So make sure your layer names are syncing up. And we'll call this secondary small. Yeah, as I said that, I noticed this name is kind of off. I don't know. Yeah, you can rename it while it's in there. That's nice. There we go. And this one I'll just call secondary small utility. Where's the next one? Primary small. Utility small. Cool. So I'll do that again with these. If I plan on scaling this further, I'd probably separate each style of buttons into their own category. In fact, I could do that, and you can even create subcategories. So of that would be, let's call it small, and rename this one to button large, or button default. All right, so what we'll do is just delete those for now and add them back into the other group. There we go. Okay, great. So now I have instant access to my buttons at any time. I just drag them out of this widget here and I could just use them at will. So that's kind of a quick run through of how I would use this and scale a design system. The assets panel would probably be my home for a lot of things in this case. So form elements, typography. There are text styles in Affinity Designer. If you check out some other videos on this site, you will see me going through each of those and how they work. In future videos, I plan on doing maybe a design library kind of concept, so where we can build something that is scalable and team members can use collectively. So that'd be kind of a nice take on something that's real modern, real world take on, you know, design these days. So the idea is keeping things as components and making them scalable. So if we were to change something later, we can always update it in one source of truth. So that's the concept I kind of design behind these days when it comes to web design or UI design. So hopefully this helped you if you're into UI design and are interested in how Affinity Designer can stand up to other apps like Sketch or Figma or something like that. So if it helped you, awesome. If you like this video, check out the other videos on the site, and thanks for watching.